Okay, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. To have a really cool little review for you guys on the brand Branch Horology. Now, they're a new Canadian micro brand looking to offer a robust line of vintage-inspired watches, and they're doing just that with this first release. This would fall underneath that everyday dress watch category. Some key characteristics in design when you're looking for something within this space. Of course, you want to find something that's clean, classic, minimalist in design, typically sensibly sized, and, you know, something that's going to be a little bit more reminiscent of classic daily worn mid-century timepieces from an era much less casual than today's typical attire. This is called the Sector, and this is paired with their gray calfskin leather strap. This is really representing the pure essence of vintage styling. The Sector borrows from the classical world of vintage horology, featuring a 316L stainless steel case, a two-toned silver dial, flame blued hands, and a manual wind Swiss made movement. The Sector definitely keeps true to its vintage spirit. These go for $761 direct, and considering the choice of movement as well as the fact that these are, you know, all hand assembled in Canada, I have to say it's pretty impressive that they're able to offer it at this price point. There are some fine details here that you typically just don't find when you're looking for a watch like this, a Sector dial under $1,000. A lot of times you're just going to kind of want something pretty surface level that's going to check those boxes, but here I will say there's a level of attention to detail that absolutely jumped out to me and did impress me. And then the size, right? This is a 36.5 millimeter diameter watch, and I think that is just a little sweet spot for something like this. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Ooh, guys, this aesthetic, it's not lost on me, and I understand there's been a slew of these types of watches, especially within that kind of vintage reissue space, but this one just captures something very special. Look at the handset, look at that thermally blued setup, look at the multi-finished dial there with that matte center, and then you have the beautiful brushed silvery tones, very nice. Look at the thin mid case. Look at the level of brushing on that mid case. Let's flip it over to the other side so we don't have the crown in the way. Look at the brushing on this piece. Look at the edge work on this. Oh, look at that. Beautiful lug horns. They just come right off the case, beautifully sharp. Not quite sharp to the touch, but sharp to the eye, which I like. You don't want it to be sharp to the touch. It's going to feel a little unfinished. This does have a little tiny bit of bite to it, but you know what? I think it's worth it because it's such a simple setup here. I wouldn't want them to overwork the case with, you know, a bunch of complex finishes when really part of the beauty of this Sector dial is going to be its level of simplicity and really just balanced design, right? And somebody will probably chime in and say, oh, well, for it to be a true Sector dial, then the tips and of the hands need to be this, and that. Guys, let's be realistic here, all right? Like, the true reasonings behind a lot of different types of watches in terms of their original design sets, what they measure and all, like, it's a lot of it is pretty much, superfluous at this time, right? Like, it's about design and balance, and I think this just does a fantastic job of that in terms of its balanced design. Now, at $761, it's not cheap, but it does have a Swiss made movement in the Sellita SW210-1 that you can find in much more expensive watches. Will you find it in a few cheaper watches? Maybe here and there, but that is really going to be more of an exception versus the rule. The rule will be you'll find this movement in typically more expensive watches. So big shout out to Branch Horology for sending this piece over so that I could, review it and to give you guys my honest feedback, because guys, I have way too many watches, and if it wasn't for brands being able to send stuff in that I can spend some time with, it would be probably a pretty boring channel where I'm just talking about the watches I already wear and have in my daily rotation. Now, in terms of the crystal here, guys, high domed acrylic. I'm not an acrylic fan, but I can appreciate the execution. Look, if this was sapphire, guys, that you wouldn't have that level of clarity there. They'd be fighting against milkiness on some of those outer edges, and this is just so crisp, so clear. I just love that. And another nice thing is, because it's acrylic and it's super clear, you don't have to worry as much about things like an inner air coating, and then that may be casting different types of tones or anything like that into the crystal and ultimately over the dial. So you're going to get to enjoy this pale silvery dial, to the fullest extent. Now, in terms of the dimensions here, guys, 36.5 millimeters in diameter, 11 millimeters thick, and that's including that high dome acrylic crystal, guys. So it's really not thick at all. I mean, look at just that mid case is something else, guys. Maybe it doesn't look as thick, or let's say thin on camera because the straps, but the straps are also quite thin. So with that, it's very pliable and fits quite beautifully. But yeah, just don't let the optical illusions fool you. This is an extremely thin watch. Now, the lug to lug, another surprising thing that's probably making it not look as thin as it is it has a really short lug to lug, 42.5 millimeters, guys. 42.5, yes, 42.5 millimeters. Some watches are 42.5 millimeters across. This is how long. So with that, again, there's proportions, right? It's squishing things down, and maybe it doesn't accentuate how thin it is because it's not super long. But I will say, guys, this just comes together. My goodness. All right. You're getting a fixed bezel, which is nicely polished and sloped. And then you're getting a push-pull crown, which makes sense, right, for a hand-wound movement. In terms of the actual, crown execution itself, it's nice. It's a good size. It's not too tall. It's not too short. It doesn't stick out too much. It's again, quite well balanced. It has a decent grip on it here. And it is unsigned, which, for some people, that's a big thing. For some people, it's not. For me, I'm not huge into signed crowns as like big selling points. Like, they don't bother me when they're not there. And if they are there, I'm not like, oh, that's thrilling. Like, this puts it over the top as a signed crown. Like, that's just not me. All right. Now, the movement that's in here, although you can't see it thanks to this very nicely executed, very sterile case back with a little bit of a bevel there, which is pretty cool. The movement inside is actually a mechanical Sellita SW210-1, a manual wind movement. It has a 42-hour power reserve on a full wind and beats at 4 hertz or 28,800 vibrations per hour for the beat rate there. The dial, of course, that beautiful two-tone silver dial with a printed index there, really laying everything out on the sector dials. And then you got the blued handset. There's no loom, unfortunately, guys, but I mean, for something like this, it's just like, where would you put the loom? You wouldn't want to sacrifice the purity in design by trying to just shoehorn loom in there. The water resistant, this is definitely going to be on the dressier side at 30 meters of water resistance versus like 50 or 100, but 30 meters should be fine as long as you keep that crown pushed in, which means you're going to be engaging all of the seals in the case where there could be, potential egress for water. Now, getting into the bracelet / strap, there is no bracelet option. I'd love to see one. Maybe some type of really cool beads of rice or bandolier or something. I don't know. There's a lot of different choices. Maybe a nice mesh would look fantastic as well. Maybe like one of those fitted end mesh. Those would be cool. But here you're getting a 19 millimeter lug width, which is one of the drawbacks. But I will say, with the smaller 36.5 diameter. That's a little smaller than I'm used to. I like a 38.5 or a 38 for a watch like this. The 36.5 though somehow just makes it look a lot dressier. And the cool thing is with that 19 millimeter lug width, instead of, let's say an 18 where I feel that would have been too small, or a 20 which might have made this look a little bit too sporty, here you're getting just a beautiful elegant flow between the case and the straps, and I really like that. 19 millimeter textured gray calfskin leather strap tapering to about 16 millimeters at the buckle here where it is nicely signed. And you can see you got your little finger on the tang buckle. It has a little recess cut out there. Looks good. You got a fixed keeper. You even do have some little extra backing there in terms of that extra stitch to hold that in place. You got a floating keeper. You have really nice stitching all the way across there. And I dig this. The color is maybe a little darker than I would have went for something like this. Personally, I think they have it also available in a brown suede. I think a gray suede, like a really, but not a shaggy gray, would have looked really great on here too. That would probably be my choice if I had one of these that I could keep. The strap itself is actually quite nice, and it actually has a nice fitment in terms of the length. On the short end, you're going to have 75 millimeters, and on the long end, 115. I'm big on the 80 millimeters and 120, which is a bit of an industry standard, but hey, not everybody has a larger wrist like me. So with that said, let's actually get this on the wrist and see how it wears. Oof, okay guys, look at that. On my 7.5 inch wrist, I think this sits just about perfectly. Of course, it's meant to wear a little bit smaller, but it definitely is feeling undersized, which I like, because you're getting a lot of dial presence, but at the same time, you're getting nice proportionality in terms of the dial opening, in terms of the lugs there, the lug horns that come off the case, in terms of the bezel and the slope that's on there. Of course, if I do get my wrist a bit too close to the lens, it's just going to make the watch have a bit of perspective distortion, so it's going to seem a lot larger on my wrist. You're going to see less of those outer edges of the strap. So what I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low here, guys, and then just tighten up the frame so that you guys can still get a detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist. And check that out. Unfortunately, the studio lights, right? This is a dark room with just, 2 lights off to the side there. It's going to be harder for you to see the blued hands than it probably would be in regular daylight. But I have to say, it's a nice blue. Look at that. It's unfortunate. It's going to be hard for you guys to really see, but it looks good. Trust me. And look at how flat that is. Look at how thin that is. Ooh, there's just a certain level of refinement there that you just wouldn't expect from a new brand. They just really knocked this one out of the park, guys. And I know, hey, big shout out and all the respect to the Canadian watchmaking space, but I will say they're not really known, right, for stuff like this. There's some great brands. I mean, Helios, one of them, one of the best micro brands out there. And you have, of course, independent staples like Marathon and everything, but this right here, I mean, it'd be easy if they would have, created some fake narrative of, oh yeah, we're brand inspired by Italy or France or, something very bougie. And I like that they were just like, nah, we're passionate about the watches and not necessarily about marketing. And, we're just putting out good products and we're taking pride in it, and our product will speak for itself once you get it in the metal. So very admirable, guys. Look at I can't get over that. Look at the flatness there. Nice organic flowing lines on the wrist. Of course, I do have a slightly larger than average wrist at 7.5 inches, but I think this really wears quite beautifully. Ooh. So with that said, although there is no loom, what we can do is get it off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the light here. Hey, there's not much going on. Like I said, there's no loom. But one thing I always like to work in is going to be a bit of a light transition. And you guys can see, even with this small little handheld light, there's enough light that's reflecting off of a dark room to bounce off of the dial. And the dial is actually legible right now. So great contrast, even without lume. Of course, without light, you're going to be struggling quite a bit. But again, once that light breaks through, look at that. I love the contrast playing off of the multi-finished two-tone dial. You got some frosty matte, pale silver, and then you got that nice brushed section there. It just looks really good. And unfortunately, it's hard for me to capture the blued nature on these hands, but look at that. And that's one of the things that I think is a little, it can be sometimes a bit overstated about thermally blued is a lot of times it's, depending on the contours, it's going to look a lot darker, right? And, sometimes brands save money by just doing a little coating, and essentially it's going to have almost like a clear iridescent blue that, it just looks like a glob of finishing on there, right? Which can look good, but something like this, there's just a certain level of cleanness and precision in that I really enjoy. And look at this, like even if I try to wash out the dial here with like an saturate it with light, it still remains super, super legible. And that's one of the beauties of these sector dials, is going to be just like the fact that they were designed again with legibility in mind. And I appreciate that. So this is a good looking watch, guys. Ooh, let me tell you, if I was on the market, this is one for sure I would definitely give more than just a second look. So closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist. Classic wear, well balanced and well proportioned. It doesn't feel too small for my 7.5-inch wrist, which, is something that I'm very concerned about a lot of the times. Does it wear too small? And it also feels super lightweight and just disappears as well. So not just, light on the wrist presence, but also light. I should say both, right? It's also light in terms of its bright nature, but then also lightweight as well, which means it's going to wear really nice. And, part of wearing a dressier watch every day is part of that, right? Is wanting something that doesn't feel so deliberate and so purposeful and tool-like, and wearing something that you rarely wear for pleasure, right? I dig that. So in terms of comparable models, guys, model variants, this is really just available in the setup right now, but you can also get it in a brown suede strap. So like when you're adding it to cart, theoretically that would be your change. Those are your options. But in terms of comparable models, this compares well against, of course, the real staple within this range is going to be the $2,400 Longines Heritage Sector Dial at just a fraction of the price. But compared to something like maybe the Baltic HMS 002 silver at closer to $380, it's not the cheapest solidly built sector dial on the market, right? Like you pretty much trust Baltic, and they make a great looking watch as well. Although I will say that Baltic is going to have the Miyota 8315 movement, and that is noticeably levels below in terms of quality against Branch's Sellita SW210-1 that they're using here, which again can be in much more expensive watches. And yes, there you can also, before you run to the comments and say, oh, well, you can actually get it in this cheap old watch too. I get that, but I would say generally for new production watches, it's something that you would be paying a good amount for. Now, in terms of the bottom line, guys, the details on the sector are just about perfect. It feels absolutely like an offering that, an enthusiast, that from an enthusiast-driven brand. Like there's just a level of passion that just an eccentricity, even in its refined simplicity, that just it bleeds through. Like you can tell somebody cared when this watch was made. It just excels in those fine details, many of which may typically be overlooked. Yes, so like if you are a bit more of a casual watch collector, there are things and nuances that you might not even look at or appreciate here, but to the trained eye, I think you will absolutely love this one. There's just so much to really enjoy. So Branch offer a level of purity in design and execution that should really be celebrated in today's typical market trends of racing to the bottom, you know, to load up on spec sheets while missing out on the finer details. Like here, yes, you're not going to, spec sheet wise, you might be missing out because of manual movement. There's, you know, very basic level of water resistance at 30 meters. You know, it doesn't have a sapphire crystal. It's a domed acrylic, but within its theme, it's chef's kiss. I mean, it is just, there's a certain level of just things coming together in the right ways that I really, really dig. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as much as I love things, you know, like the sector dials from Omega or from Longines, I would be, you know, I'd be lying to myself if I said it would be worth it for me to buy one of those watches, because those watches would get so little wrist time because I'm typically a sports watch guy. So something like this on the dressy side, it just speaks to me. And then at the price point, yeah, it's not the cheapest sector dial out there, but again, it's giving you this elevated feel that I think really resonates across the band when it comes to the overall theme of this piece. So yeah, hey, kudos to Branch Horology. They came out swinging with this one. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please like, and if you're already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.